Okay, this screencast is going to begin chapter 7, so you may need to pause the screencast momentarily to go to Moodle and download the outline if you haven't already done so. So we're just going to continue our road to rebellion, road to revolution. So despite that some of the British citizens and members of the Whig Party are a little bit more sympathetic to the colonists and what's happening in the colonies, they still, overall, the overwhelming majority of English citizens think that they need to increase the government revenue through a new series of taxes on trade. So just kind of wanting to use the colonies to make more money since they're still in a good bit of debt from the French and Indian War. We're going to see a new political leader emerge, Charles Townshend, and he is eventually going to usher a new series of taxes on trade that we're going to call the Townshend Acts. Okay, they'll be named after him. So these are very similar to like what was in the Sugar Act. It's going to place taxes on several different imported goods such as paper, paint, glass, and tea. Okay, and kind of keep that tea in mind because that's going to be a particular issue that the colonists will have with England. Okay, so the Townshend Acts puts import taxes on paper, paint, glass, and tea that are being imported into the British colonies in North America. So in terms of how the colonists feel about this, America is again going to kind of like come together and debate and resist these laws and these restrictions. The Patriots are, back at their old tricks again. You have the radical Sons of Liberty, continuing to like boycott British goods, acting out in the streets against British officials. You have other patriots writing more lists of complaints or grievances to Parliament. Okay, Parliament is getting a little bit annoyed at the increased amount of resistance that are coming from the British colonists. So they're going to start increasing the number of British soldiers that they're sending to the American colonies, and just kind of keep in mind that because of the Quartering Act, the more British soldiers that are going into the colonies, the more British soldiers there are for the colonists to house and feed, because that is their responsibility. Okay. Now, truth be told, the boycotts that are taking place, kind of being instigated by some of the more radical patriots, that is hurting British business and British merchants, because if colonists are refusing to buy some of these British goods, that hurts their profits and their business. So you start seeing some of the English businesses also asking Parliament to back off of the colonies and to kind of repeal some of these taxes, not because they are necessarily super sympathetic to the colonists, but because it's hurting their business. So with all of this pressure at Parliament, Parliament will eventually decide to kind of compromise again. They will remove all the taxes within the Townshend Acts except for tea. They leave the tax on tea because they do want to still kind of assert their authority over the colonies, but they do kind of see the economic struggle that it's causing. This will all eventually lead to a pretty well-known event known as the Boston Massacre. How well you know it might be challenged, though, based on our discussion here today. So, when the Townshend Acts were in place, there were really pretty harsh resistance. There was pretty harsh resistance to these taxes in the city of Boston in particular. We're going to see that the city of Boston is very known for like colonial rebellion, and they're very outspoken, and they typically tend to provoke things a little bit more aggressively in showing their opposition to some of these British acts and laws, which is why the Sons of Liberty were rooted in Boston. So we'll see several events kind of highlight the tense relationship that there is between the colonists and the British, and that's really more so in certain colonies than in others. Like perhaps in Virginia, things aren't as intense as they are in Massachusetts because of what's happening in Boston. Okay, so because of the tense relationship in Boston, England is going to send an increased number of British soldiers into Boston to keep order. Obviously, not a good rapport on a daily basis with the colonists that come into contact with the British soldiers. A lot of them kind of harass each other, and there's some violence. There's little, instigated quarrels that happen like pretty regularly. But on one particular day, there's a group of British soldiers gathered outside the Boston Customs House. And there's a large enough number to be, a little troop, if you will. And so a group of kind of more radical, outspoken colonists are going to kind of go over to the British soldiers. They're going to taunt the soldiers, jeer at them, throw snowballs, throw other things at them, yell obscenities at them, really kind of provoking and kind of a quarrel here. And here's what we know. We know that during this kind of exchange of just, slurs and verbal, altercation, we know that one British soldier's gun went off. And then, of course, when one soldier fires his weapon, several more after that will also fire. It's kind of just like instinct, reaction to when you hear a gun go off that, the rest of them also just shoot. And they will fire into the crowd, killing several colonists, and I think it's 5 total, but you don't necessarily need to stress about that number. I think the whole point here is we don't actually know definitively if the initial soldier meant to fire his gun at a colonist to begin with. So in all actuality, this could have been unplanned and just an accident that resulted in, a larger shooting with 5 colonial victims, including Crispus Attucks, whose name is on the screen. He was a fugitive slave and known agitator. Many of the victims, the 5, were buried together at a cemetery in Boston, including Crispus Attucks, and they're kind of marked as like some of the first casualties of the American Revolution, even though the American Revolution has technically not even begun yet, because no colonists are trying to rebel for independence against England. Okay, and we'll kind of continue with those thoughts in class on Monday. So write down any questions you have, and we'll also be going over the engraving that you see on the screen, because it's a pretty well-known image. I want to talk about some of the things that we see in this picture, and we'll just be continuing our road to rebellion on Monday. Y'all have a great weekend.